Hello, my name is Tony. First thing you need to know is this is one confused and confusing, batshit crazy piece of filmmaking. From the opening scenes of a runner in urban parkland collapsing and clutching his chest, to the final still shot of Christopher Lee's government agent, or whatever he is, sat in knowing malevolence in his car, it's a perplexing yet intermittently engrossing grab bag of weird set pieces, conceptual jigsaw elements and half-baked ideas. Second thing, it's in some ways quite unique, and in others oddly and unnervingly familiar. You'll never be sure what it's trying to say, do, or what it wants to be. It veers all over the place, treats narrative exposition with the sort of avoidance usually reserved for medieval plagues, and explains absolutely stuff all in any satisfactory way. The narrative jumps around from one thing to another, dropping plot threads and unanswered questions like breadcrumbs in a forest populated with breadcrumb-eating birds. Not only is it sometimes hard to move forward, but it's also equally difficult to backtrack without getting lost or sidelined. In the end, my advice as to the best approach would be to simply sit tight, chill out, switch off that inquiring part of your brain, and experience the ride as though you've had a prefrontal lobotomy. Be a passive observer. It's for the best, really. I've burned brain cells on this so that you don't have to. The collapsing runner wakes up in a hospital bed. He is tended by a lone nurse, who doesn't speak but looks like she never fully recovered from the trauma of an Alice Cooper concert she once went to. When he pulls back the sheets, he finds his leg has been amputated. This comes as something of a shock, you don't say. He screams. "Where's the rest of me?" It happens twice more. Each time he finds a limb has been removed. He screams. Again. Well, at least that's the title explained. He becomes a quadruple amputee. Later he is seen one final time as a severed head in a freezer compartment. This is what happens when you ain't got no body to support you. Anyway, elsewhere, in an unnamed totalitarian dictatorship, most likely somewhere in Eastern Europe, which is where such states traditionally proliferate, Conrad Marshall Jones is a high-ranking military official. The ruling militia are a sort of Nazi-commie hybrid, whose logo is a swastika-style symbol. Conrad murders his superior, Peter Salis, by gripping his shoulder with one hand and squeezing until he dies. It's like the Vulcan neck pinch, only here it's more a case of live short and perish. Meanwhile, a serial killer is beating, throttling, raping to death and draining the blood from promiscuous dolly birds in London. Detective Belliver, Alfred Marks, a Cockney Hercule Poirot with the manners and intelligence surgically removed, is on the case with his band of thick-eared plodders. Crack team of detectives, who look as though they'd be hard-pressed to detect a missing elephant with dysentery after a snowstorm. They're not the sharpest. Enter Vincent Price as Dr. Browning, a man possibly riding the gravy train. He runs a clinic in the countryside where one of the killer's victims worked as a receptionist. It's a fair bet somehow he's involved in all this. He's a character played by Vincent Price. It's not exactly a brain stretcher. Our lively serial killer is revealed as trendy dude about town Keith Michael Gothard, who picks up a dolly bird at a music club where a band billed as the Amen Corner are performing a number entitled Scream and Scream Again. Scream and scream again! Scream and scream again! Scream and scream again! Scream and scream again! Amen Corner, not usually known as the Amen Corner, were a Welsh band famed for their 60s hits Bend Me, Shape Me, and If Paradise Was Half As Nice. They split shortly after their appearance in this film in late 69. I'm inclined to imagine there may be a direct connection with their trajectory to implosion. Anyway, Keith, in his silky shirt with a ruffle stitched down the front, drives his intended victim to a secluded spot and beats the living crap out of her. Next time we see her, she's lying naked on a mortuary slab. I'm sure that most young ladies in the early 70s aspired to a better date night than this. At least a bag of chips and a Savoy before getting savaged to death by some degenerate in a purple shirt and flared trousers. Back in his homeland, Conrad is carpeted and demoted by another superior officer, Major Benedict, Peter Cushing. This isn't for offing his earlier boss, as you would expect, but for extreme brutality and the torture murder of suspects. Conrad responds badly to criticism by squeezing Benedict's shoulder and killing him. Really, is this a viable strategy for career advancement? If only I'd known. The health service would be prolifically littered with the corpses of my ex-bosses by now. In London, serial killer Keith is honey-trapped by an undercover policewoman. He evades capture by tearing off his own hand, which was cuffed to the bumper of a car. He runs to Dr. Browning's residence and in a really inspired move, worthy of the great Houdini himself, jumps into a vat of sulfuric acid in a barn on the property. As spontaneous escape plans go, I can think of better. I can also think of a better response than that of the hapless copper who plunges his hand into the acid to try and drag Keith out.
My hand!
Acid.
Ah, fuck's sake. You thought that bubbling, spitting, smoking, hissing tank of volatile-looking liquid was water? What sort of intelligence tests were candidates for the police force subjected to back then? About the same as now. Copy that. Look, now here comes Christopher Lee in the role of Fremont, a British government agent who's involved in shady dealings and sneaky political machinations with Conrad, who's just popped up in London. They're having a cryptic conversation about a missing pilot. Right. And all this so far represents just the tip of a very convoluted iceberg, to be honest. The rest of it boils down to a Frankenstein plunder, with Vince creating superhuman composite people from body parts and synthetic materials in order to bring about eventual world peace and the eradication of disease. Well, so he says. Not sure how this is expected to work, as Conrad wants to use them as super soldiers and he's sort of running the program. I think. Do I detect a conflict of interests? As it turns out, serial killer Keith was a composite running amok. Conrad's is a composite. The nurse is one too. So is Christopher Lee. And so is Vincent Price. But wait a minute. If Vince makes the composites and he's one of them, then who made Vince? Aha! What? Yep, do yourself a favour and don't question it. That way lies madness. Who's the protagonist here then? Who are we cheering on? Well, there's the handsome young Dr. David Sorrell, played by Christopher Matthews, who performs the autopsies on Keith's victims. He gets sucked into events and decides to investigate with his policewoman he fancies. Only she gets caught snooping around Browning's pad and is about to be harvested for body parts by Vince, but the good doctor helps her get away towards the end. There aren't really any central characters you will find yourself invested in or rooting for on either an intellectual or emotional level. There's a climactic confrontation in the lab involving Conrad, Browning and Fremont, and much slicing of ham and bathing in acid, and that's about it. In fairness, there's a lot of stuff going on in this film, and up until about the third act, it's a compulsive, intriguing and engrossing endeavour, despite its flaws. Events sink that irresistible hook in the viewer, the one driving the thought, I wonder where all this is going. But don't trouble yourself, you'll never fucking know. In the end, it will be a case of, I wonder what I've just watched. There's some pacey action moments and a standout car chase, so well staged and shot that it feels like it ought to belong to a much more prestigious and expensive production. This is back in the days when vehicular stunts were done for real and stuntmen risked life and limb, unlike that computer-generated, furiously fast franchise baloney we get now. The vehicles are old and cumbersome vintage by today's standards, but watching you can almost feel the strain and struggle taking place as a 1969 Jaguar S-Type takes a hairpin bend at speed with a squeal of burning brake pads and a scream of labour in chassis. These machines handle like house bricks. The car chase becomes a protracted foot chase, but it's all pretty funky and fast moving. Much of the film seems to have been shot in a murky sort of waning pre-twilight, and this adds a certain indistinct and grainy atmospheric to the murder set pieces, especially Keith's increasingly frantic and violent attempts to evade capture. The confrontation with police in the chalk quarry, culminating in his leaving his hand behind, still handcuffed to the bumper of a car, and then throwing himself into a vat of acid, is a gruesome little distraction. There's always going to be mileage in any film to feature Vince Price, Chris Lee and Pete Cushing, even though the first two share no screen time with the latter. In fact, for Cushing it represented one day's work and a paycheck, and it's little more than a cameo appearance. Plus, as a bonus for some of us, not Peter Cushing's wallet, you can also catch a fleeting appearance by Uta Stensgaard. Now, she was the object of some not particularly gentlemanly desire by many a teenage boy in the early 70s due to her topless lesbian shenanigans as Mia Carla, Carmela Karnstein in Hammer's Lust for a Vampire. Any glimpse of Uta Stensgaard is worth the legwork from my perspective. It was directed by Gordon Hessler, who had some form as a B-grade film and TV director, producer and writer. No one could accuse his output of bothering the top tier of cinematic genius. The Oblong Box, Cry of the Banshee, Murders in the Rue Morgue, and The Golden Voyage of Sinbad figure amongst his achievements. Certainly, the sort of stuff I would find attractive, but it was never going to win any awards or garner any meaningful critical acclaim. Not that that concerns me in any way. I watched it. Christopher Wicken was responsible for the script, which was adapted from a 1967 throwaway pulp novel entitled The Disorientated Man. Quite an apt fucking title. And credited to author Peter Saxon. This was originally the pen name of W. Howard Baker for the writing and publishing of Sexton Blake novels. Publisher Mayflower Books took to using the nom de plume in the mid to late 60s as a house pseudonym for works by multiple writers. A guy called Stephen Francis actually wrote the novel, which was an alien invasion story. Gordon Hessler praise Wickham for making sense out of the novel and taking it to a whole other level. I haven't read it, but I'll blindly agree with the second part of that statement. It's a whole other level, alright. Yet if this was making sense of it, I can only imagine what an unholy mess of twisted burning landfill it must have been in the first instance. The alien invasion plotline was cut from the movie, which does give it a more down-to-earth bio-horror angle, but if it makes sense to you, let me know what wavelength you're on, and I'll promise to never tune into it. Who is doing what to who and why and what for has eluded me for the best part of 50 years. If there's an explanation out there, I don't want to know what it is now. Probably see me off if I did. I read a review of it once that proclaimed Scream and Scream Again doesn't make sense because it's not supposed to. I'm not sure if I buy that. I've got nothing against movies that allow for audience interpretation of events, leave some things undefined, employ subtext, don't spell things out, utilize allegory and other narrative devices. That's not what's happening here. This film was shot in a month and itself resembles a composite of body parts stitched together randomly to make an incoherent whole lumbering across the screen at pace. Imagine the story is simply this. Euro-fascist country has developed the technology to manufacture superhuman beings and place them among us to eventually take over the world. They are funding R&D in Britain, but one of their experiments has blown a fuse and is killing chicks and drinking their blood. Why the vampiric element? Who fucking knows? But let's take it from there, Pedro. That could well have been the basis, probably was, but watching Scream and Scream Again, you'd never know it because the sum of its parts doesn't add up or integrate effectively enough to establish that scenario. Well, maybe that's part of its charm. You think?
Look at this.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking at that. So, pilgrims, if you fancy a fix of weird and off-the-wall low-budget horror thriller action and are prepared to suspend logic and disbelief a little more strenuously than usual, then you could be onto something. It's got that fascinating late 60s, early 70s time capsule vibe radiating off of it. It's as if Spike Milligan, in the depths of some horrible depression, scripted an extended episode of The Avengers for a bet. That's the 60s Avengers TV series, not the Marvel franchise space pantomime thing. If that sounds appealing to you, you should give it a peep. At certain points in time, I'm drawn back to it for whatever reasons, and I do find it a source of nostalgic appeal and entertainment. Not as much as some, but more than others, and that's often enough. Thank you for your time and attention. It continues to mean a lot to me and I value it. Like, don't like, subscribe, don't subscribe, comment, don't comment. Whatever. If nothing else, you have my undying respect and I'll never forget you. Whoever you are. Meanwhile, here's a song called Acid Bath. I was going to post a cover version of Amen Corner's Scream and Scream Again, but frankly, I don't feel like another court appearance this month. Ah, fuck's sake. Yeah, I'm definitely looking at that. There's a light shining through the trees, missing me by miles. It's a neon pool of hungry stars with 1,000 smiles. The vertigo that belts me in the head, predicting I could drop down dead. But honestly, I won't be playing ball. Take one for the team, or take a fall. I'm leaving here today. Don't that make you laugh? It isn't me they mean when they say, who's up next for the acid bath? Got a break coming for you now. It will take you there. Knuckle down and milk the cow in your finest underwear. Social media trends you to the world. Status as the latest poster girl. Feminist empowerment your thing, or another naked puppet on a string. here today. Don't that make you laugh? It isn't me they mean when they say, who's up next for the acid